Over the past 20 years, opioid use became the fastest growing form of drug abuse in the United States, with the majority of that population being young adults. Opioid use disorder is defined as a chronic relapsing disorder, and while it's possible to recover from this disorder, it's very hard to overcome it. But what caused this drastic increase of use in the opioid epidemic?
Let's talk a little bit about the history of the opioid pandemic and actually how it came to be. In 2000, the pain reliever OxyContin was introduced to the public, mainly targeting blue-collar workers and those who had major aches and pains from the job. Introducing this drug had pharmaceutical companies under the impression that it wouldn't trigger an addiction, but actually, however, this did the opposite, and we saw a steady incline in opioid-related deaths. The PDMP, with hopes to see a discontinuity in this rise, attempted to reduce usage overdose deaths through policies such as requiring the tracking of prescriptions. However, this only led to a shift from prescription opioids to a rise in heroin deaths right at the start of 2010 due to the decreasing availability of OxyContin and other prescribed opioids. Along with this came a rise of synthetic opioids such as fentanyl, which is extremely potent, and you are a lot more dangerous and at a higher risk for an overdose than heroin or morphine. From 2003 to 2018, there was an estimated quadrupling of prescription opioid sales, resulting in death. After conducting some research and better understanding the progression of this history of the opioids, we sent out a brief survey to the students at the University of Texas in order to determine the knowledge and misconceptions of the opioid pandemic, and the results are quite surprising.
Our survey had 63 responses. First, we asked our participants to identify which out of a list of substances were opioids. We found that 60% of respondents identified fentanyl and morphine correctly as opioids, and about 52% of respondents correctly identified oxycodone as an opioid. We found that about 23.8% of people believe that naloxone was an opioid, but naloxone is actually what reverses the effects of opioids. 28.6% of people thought that meth was also an opioid, but it's actually an amphetamine. 36.5% of people reported they had no idea what were opioids, which demonstrates a huge gap in knowledge in university students about drugs and opioids. And it's important that young people receive education on what drugs are, because it's a prevalent issue in our society right now. Another misconception is that touching an opioid can cause addiction or harm. 2/3 of our respondents believe that you can be harmed by making physical contact with an opioid. This is exemplified by a police officer in the United States who had a panic attack after making physical contact with fentanyl while on duty because he believed he would be harmed by it. The majority of our respondents know that not everyone who takes an opioid will get addicted. A lot of the times, opioids are prescribed after major surgeries to help with pain, but you're not necessarily going to become addicted from that. The best way to combat an opioid addiction is with medication, but about 70% of our respondents do not think that that's true. Methadone and buprenorphine are one of the most common medications used to treat opioid use disorders. Opioid addiction is very strong, and programs that do not utilize medications are not as beneficial because people are at such a high risk for relapse. Additionally, these medications can help with the intense withdrawal symptoms experienced from opioid use.
After discussing these responses, it raises the question, shouldn't we be educating young people on topics regarding the opioid epidemic? This is a big issue in the US right now, and this survey shows the need for more education and highlights some misconceptions with opioids. It's important that young people understand the problems that are occurring with the opioid epidemic to ensure that they can make safe and smart decisions.